I would like to talk about the difference between experience and knowledge. So, what is the difference between experience and knowledge? Knowledge and experience are related concepts, but they refer to different aspects of understanding and learning. Here's a breakdown of the differences between the two. Knowledge refers to information, to facts, concepts, and ideas that a person has acquired through learning, study, or exposure to various sources of information. It is the theoretical understanding of a subject or topic. Knowledge can be gained from books, lectures, research, conversations, and other forms of information dissemination. It involves knowing about something, understanding its principles, and being able to explain and discuss it. Knowledge is often organized and structured, forming the foundation for learning and problem solving. Experience, on the other hand, is the practical application of knowledge in real world situations. It involves the first hand involvement in or exposure to activities, events, or situations that allow an individual to put their knowledge into practice. Experience is gained through personal participation, observation, and engagement with the world. It can include both positive and negative outcomes, and it often leads to a deeper understanding of a subject or concept. Experience is valuable because it adds a layer of practicality, context, and wisdom to knowledge. It allows individuals to develop skills, refine their understanding, and learn from mistakes. In essence, knowledge provides the foundation, excuse me, and understanding necessary for effective decision making. Let's see, where am I here? While experience provides the practical insight and expertise gained through real world application of that knowledge. Both knowledge and experience are important components of learning and personal growth, and they often complement each other to create a well rounded understanding of various subjects and situations. That's very interesting to me because I think on non dual websites and Facebook pages on non duality, people get all bound up in experience primarily. Uh, People tend to really poo poo thinking, and part of that is a result of so many sages talking about being beyond thought or beyond thinking. And that issue, I think, is very problematic because people say, oh, you've got to be beyond concepts, so they start knocking concepts. I think that's a fallacy because concepts are just pointers, just like experience can be direct, but it can also be a pointer to deeper understanding. So I sort of get a bit reactionary when I see people poo-pooing the intellect and saying you got to get rid of thoughts, and people get on there and spend an hour talking about uh, how to stop thinking. And I've said before that the problem with uh, coming directly at thought as if it's a bad thing and saying, well, let's find some techniques so you don't have to think and your mind gets quiet. But I don't think that's the kind of quiet mind that the sages are talking about. Because if you did manage to stop your thinking without actually understanding or have any knowledge about what realization is, I don't think just stopping your thoughts would provide the understanding that you want. I happen to be extremely intellectual. So my pursuit of enlightenment, which went on for like 40 years, was, I would say, primarily through an intellectual pursuit that involved a lot of reading of the Christian mystics, the Eastern sages, Sufis, psychologists, whoever I could find. Initially, the most profound thinking that I encountered was Jiddu Krishnamurti. And when I started reading him, I was so fascinated by what he was saying that my internal response was, how do I get into the space from which he is writing? Now, I was pursuing enlightenment intellectually, reading Krishnamurti, but what I was trying to do is understand or experience the space from which he was speaking. I think that shows that I understood that it was between the lines that the answer would be. And actually, whatever it is about Krishnamurti, when I was halfway through the first book I ever read of his, which was the book You Are the World, I was reduced to tears, and I had to go to the bathroom and close the door and sit on the floor because I was crying out loud and didn't want to wake up my wife and kids. A lot of the tears were a feeling of forgiveness. For some reason, reading Krishnamurti just brought on this overwhelming sense of forgiveness. So call it my Christian guilt. It just seemed to dissipate, and it was a big relief. So my point is through reading and contemplation and some really deep thinking, that is what led me into experience. After reading that first book of Krishnamurti's, I bought every book he ever wrote. I ordered books from India, and I read them all. And during that year or two when I was really studying Krishnamurti, I had just some incredible mystical experiences. And those experiences, they come as a download. Like during one of the mystical experiences, I felt like I knew everything. And it's like it wasn't really conceptual and it wasn't really verbal, so to speak, but just a sense of knowing that I know, and a sense of I know everything is okay. Now, after the intensity of the experience went away, the interesting intellectual response was, wow, that experience came with so much authority that there is no way that any psychologist, psychiatrist, physicist, whoever, it's like no one could convince me, intellectually or otherwise, that my experience wasn't valid or that it wasn't real. Like so many people who have had mystical experiences, the authority with which it comes is an authority that we don't experience in normal life. We don't experience it from reading a book or a great lecture or somebody who's very good at rhetoric. So one of my main points is that the intellect is a valuable tool, and and I use the intellect, but I have to say I was guided by intuition. And so for that reason, both are valuable. And I just get worked up when I see people poo-pooing the intellect as if we need to get rid of it. It's like, no, we don't need to get rid of it. What we need to do is get beyond it. Well, how do you get through a door? Yeah, you open it and you go through it. You know, you don't try to go through the wall. You don't try to climb through the ceiling to get to the other side. You go through the door. So just like the Eastern sages all talk about, uh, ignorance is the problem and knowledge is the answer. Well, yes, experience is very valuable, but the sages, and if you read the original Advaita Vedanta texts, you'll see that they talk about knowledge. They don't say, oh, you need to have this experience or that experience. They say, no, you need to have this understanding. You need to have this knowledge. When you have that knowledge and when you have that understanding, then you might begin to have experiences. Now, sometimes I know that experience uh, comes rather spontaneously. But then again, experience may not necessarily be the answer because experiences come and go. It's the knowledge that you gain from that experience that really is something that you can keep. Say you have a very profound experience from which you learn a lot, and the experience is ecstatic and wonderful and blissful and all those wonderful things sages talk about. Okay, that experience ends. And when it's over, what do you have? You have the knowledge of that experience. That's all you have left. The experience is gone. So that tends to make knowledge quite fundamental and quite primary. I often think of mystical experiences as messages. They're experiential, they're body based, they're feeling based, and they come with a kind of a knowledge that isn't verbal. People speak of a download. That's the way I experienced it. But my point is, let's don't poo-poo the intellect or bash the intellect or try to get around it and say, oh, we don't need to understand anything. We don't need knowledge. We just need to experience it, and then we're enlightened. I think an awful lot of people chase experience. People like experiences, especially if they're blissful, if they're ecstatic, joyful, make everything seem okay. So people chase that, but people can spend their whole lifetime chasing experience and never feel like they've realized or they understand or that their seeking stopped. But to the contrary, if somebody contemplates deeply, if somebody reads deeply, if somebody thinks deeply, they are very likely to fall into all kinds of experiences. For one thing, the intellect can often be a problem. It can be in the way of experience. So if you work on the intellect, like examine its beliefs, its prejudices, its conditioning, and really tear that shit up, then you might be able to have an experience because the intellect could get in the way. Uh, Basically, I guess a lot of the sages, they call the intellectual approach Jnana Yoga, and it is a path. Often they say that if you're not a good thinker, that bhakti yoga or karma yoga is the thing to do. Well, I'm not against that. It just wasn't a path that appealed to me. I'm not a bhakti. I'm not a karma yogi. I had enough of that watching missionaries that I was around as a child in Africa. But thinking was my path to freedom. Did I have a lot of beliefs and conditioning and thinking that was really erroneous and problematic for me? Absolutely. But the way out for me was to dismantle that thinking. I think it was Ramana Maharshi that said, you can remove a thorn with a thorn. So, if you have some really bad thinking and some strong conditioning and beliefs that are impeding you, thinking about those beliefs, thinking about that conditioning, thinking about what thoughts cause you problem, you can unravel those bad thoughts, those wrong beliefs, those erroneous concepts. And then when you push your intellect as hard as you can, you will find that at some point the intellect realizes its limits. And when it realizes its limits, but it's still pushing, all concepts collapse and you have an experience of some kind, or you fall into silence and you find that your mind has gone silent, completely silent. But it's not because you stopped thinking. The silence came because you got understanding, you got knowledge. You broke up the conditioning by thinking different thoughts, by entertaining different concepts. So in the end, it was a thorn that removed a thorn in the foot. Then you can throw away both thorns. Sages that spent a lifetime reading books at some point decide that they can throw them all away. Throw them all away. They don't need books anymore. But before that point, if they had said, I'm not going to read any books, I'm just going to try and experience enlightenment, I don't think that that's the pathway. I think that's erroneous thinking. I think spending years trying to stop your mind and have no concepts is bullshit. I don't think it works that way. I think the intellectual issues, the existential issues that we all have, need to be resolved. And then when they're resolved, you can fall into the silence. But what's in the way of the silence is all kinds of wrong thinking, bad conditioning, beliefs that aren't true. All those have to be examined, torn apart. And when those are gone, the mind is quite free. The thinking can be a prison, but if you take your thinking apart because it's not working for you, you get to the silence eventually. So don't think I'll say any more right now. I just got a reaction because I get so tired of people poo-pooing the intellect and trying to reach enlightenment by stopping their thinking. I think that's a fool's game. I think just chasing experience is a fool's game. I'm not against experience. I'm totally in favor of intuition. Intuition was probably the goad that had me take my own thinking apart. So, follow your intuition, follow what resonates with you. But I don't think you're going to realize enlightenment by trying to stop your thoughts. The silence of not having to think comes from having your intellectual issues resolved, and the result is not the prescription. In other words, the result of deep inquiry, uh, taking the intellect in the direction that your intuition is showing, that results in the quiet mind. But you don't get to the quiet mind by attacking thinking or trying to stop thinking. The thinking stops when the issues are resolved and you have understanding. So that'll be it for my little blurb today. Thank you very much for listening.